Hello, I'm Ben Lee, and this is the LSQ podcast.
What's up? It's Jenny Eliscu. I'm back, baby. I took a little bit of the summer off, but here we are, episode 93. And I'm so excited to finally have gotten to interview Ben Lee, the Aussie indie legend whose music I've been a huge fan of ever since he was putting out records with his teenage band Noise Addict back in the 90s. And we've known each other kind of through friends and through indie circles ever since then, but it's great to have gotten to know him better in recent months. We've become friends and sort of bonded over our love of Jonathan Richman, and it's gone from there. And thanks to Ben and his wife Ione for hosting me in their home to record this interview, which delves into Ben's musical history even before Noise Addict. But also, we get to talk about the new music he's working on. He just put out a couple of songs that originated back in '93 and which he only just recorded. But there's also a whole new Ben Lee album coming together, which I'll keep you posted on. Let's get into the interview. It's wild to be the boss in someone else's house at your table. Hi, Ben Lee.
Hello, Jenny Eliscu.
Welcome to the LSQ podcast.
It's been a long time coming. It's been a dream of mine.
It's been an adventure to get here. I want to say that we are in Ben's home right now, and he's been kind enough to rig up a beautiful sounding recording scenario.
If we're going to do it, let's do it.
Let's do it, right? And also, this is part of the reason that this is set up already, is that Ben has a podcast as well called Weirder Together.
Yeah, me and my wife, Ione Skye, we do it, and it's a half-hour, cozy, weekly, just sort of recap and exploration of our lives. I'm very much into silliness and having a light touch with things. I think as I've gotten older, I used to be so trying to wring the neck of life for meaning. You know what I mean? Like all existential young songwriters, And now I just realize there's something about having a light touch and a playfulness that is actually where I've touched the most profundity in my music and life. So I like to do more and more things that have that sort of energy to them.
Yeah, and I recently had the pleasure of seeing you play a show here in LA at the Moroccan Lounge, and it was my first time seeing you in concert in probably 20 years.
No, but didn't you come? Weren't you in Busy with that little show at the City Winery?
Yes.
But that was when we had Joanna Sternberg played and Juliana Barwick maybe was playing with you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Clearly was very memorable for you.
It clearly was very memorable, exactly. That was more of a sort of a mellow environment at City Winery. Yeah, I mean, it was just really cool to see, not just to get to hear you play the new songs that I hadn't heard before, but also to kind of do a new treatment on some of the older tunes and the sort of EDM version of Cigarettes Will Kill You.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of it's interesting because I think, obviously, I'm sort of a classicist in the way I think about songwriting. It's I write verse, chorus, catchy melodies. I keep it pretty simple, but at the same time, I think it's really important to remember there's sort of no rules for careers, and particularly those of us coming out of 90s indie music. It's literally being written as we go. So, I think Pavement, watching them do their shows is such an interesting experience for all of us that we're there the first time round. Because you're whoa, are we sort of involved in classic rock now? It's a different thing. And so I think for artists like me, there's a chance to sort of write our own rule book on what these next phases of our careers can look like. And it's pretty exciting in that sense.
Yeah, let's go back to the beginning. I mean, well, I want to say before we go back to the beginning, what is known as the beginning of your career when you started with Noise Addict, and for me the introduction was Grandpa Wood, which I was listening to, your debut solo album, which I was listening to in the car on the way over here, and probably the first time I've listened to it in full in a long time. And I was like, holy shit, this album is still amazing. It's all bangers, worth revisiting, listeners.
I was talking to Amy Taylor from Amyl and the Sniffers about this the other night because they are, they're making a follow-up to a sort of pretty big record for them, and nowadays music is so single oriented, even for punk bands and stuff, because it's so driven by streaming and everything. And I just still have the belief that you don't treat singles differently. You just try and make an album where every song's amazing. And I don't mean that to denigrate singles, because I love singles, but you should make records where every song's a single, not treat them as like, ooh, the special unicorn song that you get. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think Grandpa Wood is an example of that, where like even at 15, I went in going, okay, there's going to be 20 songs and everyone's going to be a hit in my, my weird little lens of what that meant. Yeah.
But at that point, you didn't have anyone that you had to whose approval you were seeking at that point.
Just girls.
Right, but not a financial backer, right?
No, that's right.
Like the Amyl and the Sniffers thing, I'm assuming at this point that's what enters the equation too, and not just now, but for a young band, if you get into the system, if you get noticed for being better than most other new bands, early on, the pressure turns on early as well, so that you're worrying about things like singles within your first couple of albums. Yeah, it's just immediately a pressure cooker from your label, and the awareness that like if you don't make the right choices, it's all gonna kind of go away, which I'm assuming, and I'd love for you to talk me through this phase of when you were first putting out music, how you felt about it. Did you feel any sense of pressure other than from peers or girls, as you've said, like to impress people, but just a pressure like to succeed when you were first starting to do it? Or did it just feel like I'm a child?
No, I mean,
I'm an actual child. There's no pressure.
No, I wanted more out of life than what I saw around me, which is a very common thing for people that become self-motivated in their careers young. And it's not that it wasn't that like my household was abusive or anything like that. It was just, it was a middle-class Jewish suburban Australian household in which the path was sort of laid out for what your aspirations should be. And they're fine. I know tons of people that have taken that road and they're having very happy lives.
What's the path?
You go to university, you study something that has a business or legal, so like commerce law was like the big thing that like families wanted their kids to do. I mean, these days I sound like I'm like I'm talking to Kanye, but there is a not in an anti-Semitic way, but there is a sense, and it comes from I think the Jewish impulse to survival, to make sure that you kind of like get yours, like that you set up and there's security. And then my grandmother, when I got my first little publishing check, she was like, you should use this as a down payment for an apartment. Like, when I was like 18. And I just think there was a sense of sort of like responsibility that maybe it is sort of a post-Holocaust generation thing where, hey, you got to make sure that you're set up because you never know what can happen. And I just think I have, some of my rage dissipated over the years, and I realized that I'm just sort of a bit more experimental as a person. Like I wanted to kind of find my own value system and my own path. So music became a way to do it. Like I saw the door open. I saw that I have this one memory of being in, I think maybe I was in second grade, and there was a musical they were putting on at school called Uncle Moishy and His Mitzvah Men. And we were too young for them to like hold auditions or anything, but they stood everyone up in class and we had to go around and just sing Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. And the teachers were basically making a note of who could sing and who couldn't. Maybe it's wouldn't, but either way, there were the people that were willing and could do it, and
also shouldn't.
Yeah, shouldn't. And I remember it got to me, and I just read Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do, like basically just in tune. And I saw the teachers look at each other in a way that like, he can carry a tune, and it's amazing how little clues like that, they become part of the map you put together of how to create a life. Like I saw that, a melody comes out of my mouth and there's some grown-ups in power who kind of can sense, oh, let's give this guy an opportunity. And all of that was just building until I saw Nirvana, basically. And once I saw Nirvana play, because that was the first, I'd seen like local punk bands like the Hard-Ons and the Hellmen and Mass Appeal and Rat Cat. But as far as international bands, I'd only seen like Motley Crue and Skid Row and like I thought of like to get really big, it had to be this sort of theatrical pomp type thing. And once I saw Nirvana in, I think it was, whether it was 91 or 92, that big day out, right. It was like the week Nevermind came out or before. They were in Sydney. And it was just 3 guys on a stage. And the feeling in there was unbelievable. I could barely see. I was jumping because I was short and I was jumping up, and there were these 2 girls who were like late teens, early 20s, and they were letting us have, me and my friend, have sips of their beers. And I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. So it's like you get all these clues. And then I remember like taking songs, like everything, like Guns N' Roses songs, and sort of analyzing the structure. Like, oh, there's like an intro and then a verse and a chorus, and then maybe a re-intro, verse, chorus, then maybe a bridge, or there can be like a solo, double chorus, end. And I just wrote it down, and I was like, this isn't that complicated. And so anyway, that's how it all just bit by bit came into my mind. And then my aspirations were just, if I want to make this real, every song I write has to be better than the last song I wrote. That's how you get good at anything.
Yeah. It's not that hard. Just do it better gradually, people. So you got cast in
Uncle Moishi. I was Uncle Moishi.
You were Uncle Moishi.
I became the big guy. And my hit song, my big moment was Ain't Gonna Work on Saturday. Ain't gonna work on Saturday. Ain't gonna work on Saturday. Double, double, triple pay. Ain't gonna work on Saturday. Yeah. Shabbos.
Wow.
Yeah.
But so you, and also some details in there I'm curious about. How did you get to who let you go to Big Day Out? Was that a parental thing? Did you have to sneak? Was it?
Well, I'd already been going to like metal shows and stuff from when I was 10. Like I saw Motley Crue on the Dr. Feelgood tour when I was 10, and my dad took me.
Okay.
And so then there was like I was going to shows. My dad was really cool. Like he wasn't into music that I was into, but he was into supporting my love of it. So he'd like come to the shows and wear these big industrial headphones. It was mortifying, especially because when you're that age, what you picture when you're going to a Motley Crue show is that you're going to enter into like an orgiastic bacchanalia of just like women with their tops off and drugs. And the reality is you're going into the Sydney Entertainment Centre and, 2 elevations back, standing there in your seat. And, yeah. But so it built up and up, and I think I also just kind of built their trust. Like whatever mischief I was getting up to, I still was at the place I was meant to be when it was time to get picked up and all that.
You actually, so you're how old at Big Day Out seeing Nirvana?
So it was the beginning of 7th grade. So I was 12, turning 13.
Okay. I'd
been playing piano and I'd tried writing songs on that. And then I switched to guitar. And then that was when I really just went, oh, I've learned A, D, and E chords. I can write songs. And I wrote a song after I had a few guitar lessons, and after the first one I wrote.
And is Nirvana what you thought you wanted to sound like at that point?
It's funny because I think, and this is something to do with whatever my personal legacy is that I'm kind of still figuring out, but part of what people enjoy about me is my sense of personal delusion or my excitement about what I'm doing. You know what I mean? Like it's not that I'm making something always that's objectively brilliant. It's that I'm doing it with a spirit that is sort of like inspires people, I think. So when Noise Addict made our first demos, do you know the Half a Cow label from Sydney? So that was Nick Dalton, who played in the Lemonheads or on the It's a Shame About Ray. He ran a record label there that like Smudge were on, which was Tom Morgan, who co-wrote all those songs with Evan. Anyway, he was a big Tascam 244 guy. So I called him and got some advice on how to record. But in my mind, I thought I was making like Appetite for Destruction. Like I thought I was going to make some hi-fi bullshit. I was just like, this is going to rock. And it's 3 musicians, kids, 14-year-olds who don't know how to play. And secondly, the first time I've ever used a 4-track recorder, so don't know how to record. Yet I was so delusional and inspired that to me it sounded like Appetite for Destruction. So I think when people like Thurston Moore and stuff heard that, they were like, this is actually insane. Like this is what is exciting about sort of folk art. When you meet young or old people, young people, but people who are in their own reality, and that involves a lot of fantasy, but you can kind of go on the journey into their fantasy. So yeah, it was, I thought we were making something very hi-fi.
How did Thurston Moore hear that?
So there was a street press we had 2 street press papers in Sydney one was called On the Street and one was called Drum Media. and they came out every week, and they were sort of my world. Like every Wednesday afternoon, I would get off the bus early at a certain shop where I knew I could get the street press, and I would read them cover to cover. It was like, you know, it was like the Village Voice, like everything happening in Sydney. And they had one on the sort of inside back cover was advice to musicians. And it was, the first one was like what to do with your demo. And it described things I'd never heard about. Like you have to have a thing called a bio, and you have to have a photo, and then they said, go pull out your cassettes or your CDs and write down the addresses of all the record labels that you like and put them in a package with a note with everything, and then call 1 week later and check they got it and say who you are, and then call 2 weeks later and check that they've, and I'm a good student, you know? So I did that. I just did that, you know? And I remember I sent it to this label called Waterfront, which was also a record store. And I called 2 weeks later. We started getting all these just instant rejection letters, like horrific. Just like people almost like laughing at us and thinking we were in on the joke, and we weren't at all because we thought it was awesome. And then I called Waterfront and I said, hey, this is Ben from Noise Addict. We sent you a demo tape. Just curious if you got it. And this voice at the other end goes, Ben, your tape stood out like dog's balls. And that's the start of my career. And basically he was then going to start a label with this guy, Steve Pav, who was like a sort of kind of upcoming promoter in Sydney. And he toured Nirvana, Sonic Youth, Beastie Boys. So it was like pre-internet. So that was still tape trading kind of times where like, you remember things like the Jerky Boys and all that, and all those like Buddy Rich yelling at his band. Like everyone would have these cassettes and bands would share them amongst each other.
Orson Welles doing outtakes from commercials.
That kind of thing. And who were there? There was Shut Up Little Man. Do you remember that? There were two guys in an apartment in LA who were like, it was like an odd couple situation, but also coupled with mental illness and alcoholism. And they would argue, and their catchphrase they'd say to each other was "Shut up, little man." And someone living below them just started taping them and putting them out. So anyway, this was a culture of like bands sharing weird stuff with each other. And that was how my music started getting around.
Wow. Okay. So did you know that was going on? I mean, you knew that you'd at least reach Waterfront Records, that you're like, something's going to happen here. They liked it. At least we're off. We're out of the gates. But were you aware as it kind of began to build? That's one of the things I'm so curious about in this entire early phase where, and again, like you were a minor, you were a child, you know, and like you have children, you know, it's like, okay, well, that is as precocious as you might have been, as much as you probably feel like you're the same person as you were then. Did you know as you were getting there and getting somewhere and getting far and then getting farther than you aimed for, like what was happening? Yeah,
there was really good things happening. Like, so when I talked to Steve Stavrakis on the phone, he was like, so I'm setting up a label with this guy, Steve Pav. He wants to come and see you. Do you have any gigs coming up? And so I was like, yeah, we do. And we didn't have any gigs coming up. You know, it's like classic, like, you know, what you do when you start a band. So I remember talking to my parents and I was like, I need to set up a gig because this guy wants to come and see it. And my dad goes, well, the Waverley Library is having a secondhand book sale and sausage sizzle, which is like a barbecue in Australia. And they're like, do you want me to ask if you're like a local band? Do you want to see if you could do a little set at the library? And I was like, great, let's ask. So we got the gig and it was, you know, so it was very funny. So we set up, it was sort of like outdoor under this kind of pagoda type thing. And it was just our school friends sitting around, sitting in a circle basically. And then this one hipster dude with a shaved head, and that was Pav. And he came to the show and he was just watching it. And then he came back after and he said, hey, my name's Steve Pav. I really like that. Do you guys want to support Sonic Youth next week? And that was when it's sort of like, I was like, yeah. And then he was like, well, actually, Thurston was wondering if you want to spend the day in the studio and he could record you guys. And so that was really like the kickoff to our like debutante type moment, you know, and we met Thurston and It was
Or
funny.
you were a Sonic Youth fan.
Yeah. But like, I came to Sonic Youth through Nirvana,
Right.
which is like, I was that generation,
And also, it wasn't. I mean, Nirvana was mainstream accessible to kids.
Yeah.
And Sonic Youth was something you had to know to look for.
Yeah, but I've also I have this thing that maybe is more from like our generation where music wasn't as easy to get access to. So a lot of the music I fell in love with by reading about it. So I would like fall in love with it. Like I remember Nirvana, I fell in love with that band before I heard them because I read so many articles. It was right as Nevermind was about to come out. And it was funny because everyone described it as Black Sabbath meets the Beatles. And so I pictured in my head what I thought that would sound like. And I remember when I actually got Nevermind, I was like, this is not exactly what I was picturing. But then I listened to it a few times. I was like, I dig it. I can get on board with it. But what I fell in love with was almost like the conceptual presence of these artists. And I'm still kind of like that. Like I have a pretty wide variety of taste. I like artists that like stand for something good. And that can give me a lens to appreciate their work. Like I'm not a total aesthete with art. Like I like the value, almost like the community value that artists add through bringing their own perspective. But now you can access music so easily that it's so rare. You would never really have that unless it's like a band you hear that hasn't put anything out yet, But then it was like, so I read about all these bands,
In
like
these,
Sonic Youth
in
and the
these street,
Pixies
right?
before
In these newspapers you're
yeah,
talking
and then
about
like
mainly,
I'd get
or?
like Enemy and Melody Maker, but they
Okay.
were I could only really, I was a kid, so I could only afford the ones that came by boat. That's why in I Wish I Was Him, I said he gets his NMEs sent by air, not boat, because when they came airmail, they were like $15. And this is in 1992 at the newsagent. But then the ones that had come by sea mail were like 3 months old and were like $4 or $5. So actually with the way culture moved, by the time something was big in England, 3 or 4 months was actually like an appropriate time for it to get to Australian. The psyche.
Right,
I didn't need to know about menswear the week they came out.
You did. You really did.
So I was just reading and so everything that was happening in culture at the time, which was, and this is something that I've talked a lot about because it's one of the grand mysteries of how my life exists as it exists now, that my skill set was uniquely useful for that moment in culture where people were looking for quirky home recorded, basically unprofessional stuff, which had I been going at it 5 years earlier or 5 years later, it wouldn't have had the same, like the door opened at that moment. That was when like, I remember on the Grandpa Wood tour, Rebecca Gates, she'd sung on the Elliott Smith record with, what's the one with him jumping between the buildings, in purple?
On the self-titled album?
Is that the self-titled? Yeah. So that she played me St. Ides Heaven. She's like, my friend Elliot's made this record and it's incredible. And this was all, and then the reason I made Grandpa Wood with Brad Wood was because of Exile in Guyville, the Liz Phair record. So it was just like I showed up at the party at the exact moment when they were playing my song on the dance floor. And that is weird, man, but that happens. Like that happened for the Strokes. That happens when like you show up and it just happens to be where culture is ready to go. You're there at the right time. And I really have a type of like, that's where I have like a mystical gratitude for the fact that my whole life essentially unfolded from that weird moment of kind of synchronicity,
Yeah, I mean, you've thought about this a lot more than I have.
Yeah. My career.
It's only fair. It's only fair that your theories about yourself are stronger than my theories about yourself. But I also think that you're underestimating, and I would say the same of the Strokes, who I'm a huge fan of. Yes, there's some right place, right time, zeitgeist kind of shit, but like in the midst of it, it's, and I think you wear your appreciation of other artists on your sleeve. You always have. And so you feel like, oh, wow, I was appreciated by those who appreciated me. It's right place, right time. But it's like, no, there's something at the base of it, which is just your connection to music and your ability with it that is uncommon.
Yeah, that's true.
And and therefore at any time, it would have been maybe not quite as much of the exact right moment, but it would have, you know, I think like it's not just that there was an aesthetic and there was a charm and, oh, they're kids, no, they like our music. It's, you know, even just today, like I say, driving over, listening to Grandpa Wood, it's like, of course I can hear the things that I know were influences that I was listening to in that era as well. That was just like the melodic influences, but it's still sort of like, how does this 15-year-old have such good melodies?
Well, look, that I guess I'm hearing like I had a similar conversation with John C. Reilly at Largo one night when I was kind of, you know, going on about Pavement or something, like one of the artists who I considered like the godfathers of what was happening and that helped me along. And John was like, yeah, but you showed up with the songs, you know, and I think maybe that is actually even harder for me to understand. And so I don't know what to do with that, because I mean, whatever inbuilt talent is, you know, it's funny. I was listening to Lou Barlow's podcast, Raw Impressions this week, and he has his daughter Izzy on it, and she's singing, making up a song. But what's really interesting about it is she's picked up all of the nuances of phrasing and rhythm from like Taylor Swift. This is a little kid, but her brain has taken in, with no intellectual analysis, what lyrics should sound like. So they're silly because she's like, I'm gonna open the window and like these things that are like, they're like tropes in the way lyrics sound now. So there are certain brains that are also absorbing information in areas that we care about. But it's weird, man. It's really, it's still mysterious to me, I guess, is the bottom line.
Yeah. I mean, I want to focus in a little more on because, you know, you've talked about kind of some logistics and some strategy and some the right place, right time kind of stuff. But in the actual just sitting with your guitar, letting music come to you, writing songs, like, tell me a bit about kind of how that developed and just when you realized that it was that was meaningful to you and special to you beyond just like what you know, where it might get.
Yeah, well, another thing that helped me about that era was indie rock at the time was all about being prolific. So like Guided by Voices had started putting out all their weird, like, you know, photocopied vinyl covers. I remember the first time I saw that. I don't know if it was Propeller, the one that they were colored in, the wrestlers on the front, and each one had been colored into. And I was like, and then Half a Cow, like they were putting out, every artist had like 5 side projects and was putting out. And so the influence on being prolific was actually a great atmosphere for me to come up in, because it gave me a framework by which writing every day, it wasn't like, I didn't see it as like, I'm going to write 300 songs in a year and I'll use 10 of them. I saw it as like, I'm going to write 300 songs and put out 30 different projects, right? So that is a really good way to get better. And Pav lived down the road from me, and I would go and borrow his vinyl and tape it all the time. Like twice a week, I'd go to his apartment. He had this amazing record collection, and I would like, that's where I first heard Jonathan Richman, the Stooges, the Velvet Underground. Like I got my musical education from his record collection. But my part was that I would bring him a cassette of new songs every week. So like literally I would write a song every day, at least a song every day. Sometimes I'd write 2 songs. I just didn't, it didn't seem weird at that time. Also because I like didn't like school. So I'd come home and I'd go into my world, which was, I was building this thing. I was like becoming a songwriter, and these tapes would pile up with songs. And there could be another great thing that came from indie rock was like songs could be small. They didn't all need to be Oasis songs that were like, get the whole stadium going. They could be a tiny comment on the crack in your mug and how that makes you think about someone. And that could be 30 seconds long. And that's, I think of all these liberating things that came from indie rock that just created this fertile atmosphere for practice, basically. And
so when did you start to feel like it was like you were in, you know, kind of like you were like, I'm a recording artist now. This is, this is my career. I'm doing this.
I mean, I don't know if you relate to this, but that's been a very gradual thing for me. Probably because essentially I was a kid who got picked up by the circus and they were like, hey, you're one of us. There's an interesting opera by Wagner called Parsifal, where this guy wanders through the forest and he stumbles on the knights sort of the Round Table having a secret ceremony. And it's basically like he's found the Grail and he's blown away, but they say, you're not ready, go back and find us again. And the line they use in it, he says he went through great effort and conscious suffering. And then at the end, he finds his way back to them, but now he's been wounded and humbled in appropriate ways. And now he's basically an artist, or he's enlightened or whatever, you know? So I think for me, it was a little bit like that, where like I got welcomed in, but I hadn't chosen it totally consciously. Like I was still, my friends were my friends at school, and they were all going to be going to university and marrying Jewish girls and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so it was a very unfolding process that I would actually say, without wanting to undermine the question, it's like still unfolding for me. And I remember like about 10 years ago, I was in the studio with this guy, Alex Burke, who's a really great vibraphone player. And he was asking me about the label I was on at the time. I guess it was like Dangerbird or something. And he said, how's it going with them? And I said, it's good. I mean, you know, they're not going to like break me, but they're like doing the job. And he was like, Ben, haven't you already broken? And it was this funny moment where I realized that I wasn't in present tense with everything that's happened, whereas now I am. But it took me a really long time to get to the most simple answer, which is that like, I like making shit with people I like, and the world seems to want that enough from me that that's what I should do. I mean, it's like so simple, but it's also required so much genuine self-esteem that it was like hard to get there actually, because you can do it with bravado and just be like these like tech bros, you know, whatever, who like develop apps and are like, yeah, I'm the next Mark Zuckerberg, but like whatever, that doesn't mean anything. You're going to sabotage it if it's not real. So it was like a very long journey for me to feel like I'm like in my destiny. But the cool thing about that is that I've been playing the long game the whole time. So, you know, like I used to say when I was like 18, 19, I used to say, I'm going to be making my best records in my 70s. And it would be laughable because it was an 18-year-old kid who had no idea what real life looked like. Right. So to say something like that, it's like, you don't even know what your 20s are going to be like. But now I've been doing it for 30 years. When I say I'm going to be doing it for 30 more, people are like, you probably are actually.
Right.
And you, even if you're not making your best stuff, you're going to be making something interesting because you've got enough of a track record of making interesting things. So it's like, you got to like earn all that. You know what I mean? To like really carry it properly.
So you're saying that even at in the phase of your career where you're, you know, fair to say, huge in Australia, you know what I mean, playing festival, and you're just like getting to put out, you know, there's no worry that the next album isn't gonna have a home or whatever, like that you felt you didn't feel secure in your position at that point.
Yeah, I think I don't know. It's so tricky. It's like, you know, I remember when the Vines came out. And they were Australian and they were like the hot band, you know, and I remember me and Rose Byrne went to see them at the Troubadour and I was like probably 23, but I felt like an old man. I was like, this is the new shit. You know what I mean? And then I remember like, you know, going to sign for Max Fish or somewhere and there's like the Strokes and Ryan Adams hang out with them. And like, I was like, wow, like I'm sort of like these guys' age actually, but I'm from another generation artistically. And I think a lot of times I've thought it's probably going to be over at some point. It's actually in the last 5 years to a decade that I've realized that I actually can't get away from it, because every time I've tried to just follow other interests, but they didn't really like work. And I would find myself having ideas for music. So I see it as a little bit like it took me a long time to get to the point of actual surrender to what creativity is in me. And it's, I think, but I think the story I'm telling is not that uncommon. I think there are people that stand all the time on stage accepting Grammys or headlining arenas and feel like a total fraud, and also feel that they're basically like on watch because it's going to all crumble down. And it does often. Like when you look at like the Kings of Leon or Fiona Apple, or like artists who were thrust into the mainstream with like tremendous acceptance and desire for their work, they almost had to dismantle it consciously or unconsciously in order to rebuild it as something that felt like their own.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a complicated process.
Would you say in retrospect that as you've said, you're sort of these past 5 years or something, you feel like you've kind of reached an awareness of just like, it is happening. I am doing it. It's always, I'm always doing it. I'm never not doing whatever the thing is that I'm supposed to do, kind of, in a way. But in those earlier eras when you were struggling just to kind of feel grounded, did it affect the music you were writing? And does a greater sense of security now affect the music you've written since then?
Yeah, well, I think what I notice is sort of through my 20s to kind of mid 30s, I was saying, I was like preoccupied with existential angst, and that led me into all kinds of like spiritual explorations and like consciousness stuff and all these, all the weird teachers and communities and all that. And I actually think that sucked a lot of the humor out of my music. Like when I think about how I came onto the scene, it was with Wish I Was Him, which was like a fucking funny song. You know what I mean? Like it was earnest and it wasn't. And I think that sense that, okay, this is totally bizarre. This is this 14-year-old kid. We can't tell if he's being serious or not. He obviously understands something about what's happening in pop culture, but it's also very vulnerable. And like all of that stuff, it's almost like the genesis of my whole career was in that. And I think that's common with people's first singles or records where you go, yeah, it's all in there. You can see the potential of what it can be. And I think as I was feeling when I was in periods where I was feeling less secure, I was less playful. And so I think being overly serious for me doesn't flatter, because I'm intense. It's probably because I'm intense that like if you couple intensity with too much seriousness, it becomes like super off-putting, because people are like I only would say like, oh, you're just so intense at the shows that like people are like, I'm not in group therapy. I'm like, here, but you know what I mean? Like, and it's true. I can see that. But it's interesting that if I put that intensity into playfulness and couple it with humor, it suddenly becomes like a delightful space for the audience to be in. So it's all stuff I've sort of had to work through.
How would you say that your approach, your process is most kind of similar now to when you were a kid, and and most different? And do you still have any kind of, not a song a day, but like what is your kind of I think
it's I really like to be creative every day. It's no longer writing a song every day. Maybe it's mucking around on the MPC and making beats. Maybe it's doing a podcast. Maybe it's talking about a project I want to do. Like it's very, if I just get into logistics and promotion, I'm bored. I understand those things are part of being an adult and being an upstanding member of the creative community, but it's not where the juice is for me. The juice is in brainstorming and doing new stuff. And I think that recognizing that about myself, and it's almost like understanding your blood type or what food makes your body feel good. That I know, like guitar, when I play it, it's almost like it feels healthy. You know what I mean? Like even if I don't have to be writing a song, I can just be noodling around. Like sometimes I'll be like, I haven't played guitar for a week or something. I pick up the guitar and I just feel healthy. It feels good for me. So I think in some ways that's exactly the same, that always being at the beginning of a project is where I find my truth, kind of. Like it's where I'm scared and innocent and ambitious and foolish and brave and all those things. Like those, I've always had that. Like I can charge in and go, we don't know where we're going, but let's go there. And that is fundamental to who I am. What's changed is being a bit more, I guess you sort of just learn to be a little bit more intentional about where you put energy. I've been involved in very long projects that have sort of not ultimately gone anywhere, which I think we all have to go through that in show business. It's just part of And then some of them do. And that's what's so frustrating. You can't just go, well, if it's taken more than a year, it's not going to happen, because it's not true. But there's been a whole process around starting to know, like, what's my job and what isn't. Like, I heard Lena Dunham say something really cool once, which she was talking about making movies, but she said, find the story that only you can tell and make it with whatever resources are available. And I think that identifying, like, what are my stories to tell is a really important part of knowing where to allocate my energy creatively. Like, everything me and Ione are doing together under our Weirder Together kind of company, like, you know, pods and some developing different things. And even, like, you know, we love to throw parties. Like, we look at that as part of our creative expression too. It's all got to feel like it's our story to tell. You know what I mean? Like, because otherwise it's like you're wasting your time. Like, there's so many people who can do so many things I've tried to do better than me and more naturally than me. But there's things that I can do more naturally than anyone else. So it's just that, what do they call that? Your zone of genius? Like, try and be in your zone of genius. That's like where you are contributing in a way that's unique and powerful.
Your Zog.
Yeah, is that what it's called? Your Zog?
I'm just saying,
like
ZOG, your
I
Zog.
like it,
You
your
got to
Zog.
get deep into your Zog.
Yeah.
And you actually, and if it's okay that we're talking about this, are about to start recording some new stuff tomorrow, right?
Yeah. So I'm making this record, this new album. It's 10 songs, 30 minutes. It's called This One's for the Old Heads. And it's all about passion for music, growing up, kind of like being a punk and staying a punk, but at the same time maturing. And I've got John Wurster and Jason Narducci coming in. They land today.
Amazing.
And then we're going in the studio tomorrow, and we're going to bang out the tracks over 3 days. And I'm really excited about that because, yeah, again, it's like, that's my story to tell. You know, it's funny, Shamir was I'd never heard that phrase, old heads, before. That was something Shamir called me once. He was like, we were talking about something, how like both me and Malcolmus were two people that like loved Shamir from the get-go when we heard him. And Shamir was like, yeah, you know, I do everything with kind of this like playful sort of approach, which I think is why the old heads get into it. And I was like, whoa, the old heads. I love it. And I was like, wait, what is that exactly? And since then I've heard it so much, but it's like, you know, the people that were in the scene before you, there's always people that were in the scene before you. And like, you know, honoring that, like honoring people that continue to show up for music and that music continues to show up for them. But that there's complications in it. Like I have this line in one of the new songs that says, I love the old heads because they've still got soul, but when they get stuck in the past, it leaves me cold. Because that's part of it too, that it's okay to be an old head, but you got to connect to the child in you, especially with music and appreciating it. So anyway, we're just going to go in and make this record, and I'm thrilled about it.
One of the things that I appreciate about you is your enthusiasm for younger artists, and obviously it's a key part of your story is, you know, that older artists supported you. How do you find, you know, new music and new artists that you are intrigued about, and you know, do you tend to just sort of reach out to people and say, hi, nice to meet you, I'm Ben Lee, is there anything I can do to help? Or how do you, these kind of bridge building, like how does that work?
I mean, if it's Australian, the Australian community is very small, you know, so yeah, if it's an Australian artist, you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to end up being in a room with them and meeting them, whatever. But I honestly, it's kind of the same as it's always been. I just follow the clues in front of me. Like there's this artist, Pool Blood from Toronto, that Shamir produced. And so I went, oh, well, I love Shamir's taste. I'll check it out. And her name's Mariam. And we ended up becoming, you know, followed each other on Instagram, became friends. It's not a complicated process. And not every artist that you admire or support becomes a real friend. I mean, I think friendship is... I love it so much, and so many of my friends are artists, but some people I just admire from a distance, and that's great too. You know, it's an interesting thing, like finding your creative tribe, but then also finding your personal tribe, like people you want to party with and gossip with and hang out with. That's like a personality thing, you know? So like someone like Georgia Mack or Shamir, they're like people who they happen to coincide, like artistically and personally. It was just our matches were like the right thing at the right time. And Lou Barlow is interesting because he's someone who we had that personality thing. Like in 1994, we ended up like going out dancing after Noise Addict support, or I supported Sebadoh, and then we were like writing a song on a beach as the sun came up in St Kilda in Melbourne. And now we're, he and his wife are doing a podcast on our network. And, so those are funny things that unfold. But then there are other people that, like even like Mike D, who helped me so much, and I was on his label, but it didn't blossom into like the type of friendship because that's okay. It doesn't have, it's like actors seem to be better at that. Like you can be in a family with someone because you work on a project for 3 months where it's like you see them every day and it's so intimate, and then people never see each other again. But I'm probably a bit more like a codependent person. Like I like looking after relationships, but yeah, I just see it as it's like the natural flow of things. I always love. Do you like Laurie McKenna? Do you know her?
I don't know her.
So she's a Nashville songwriter.
Okay.
She's done albums with Jonathan Wilson producing,
okay.
But she's one of the coolest of the Nashville songwriters. And she did an album called the Rifle and the Bird or something. I've forgotten the name, but anyway, she has a song called Humble and Kind that she just has this amazing verse in it that it stayed in my mind. She says, "When the dreams that you're dreaming come to you, when the work you've put in is realized, help the next one in line, always be humble and kind." And I do think there is a natural flow of things where it's like we all benefit from having a vibrant, creative community.
Well, I actually think that is a great place for us to wrap up.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And like I was saying about, the old heads, like people that have kept the scene alive of interesting music, like I think I've always admired your commitment to that. And I know some of it is, it's sort of where you end up. It's the niche that you end up most suited for, but it also takes tenacity and commitment to continually to support music that doesn't always have other outlets to it, and to take it seriously and to share it. And I just think it's really admirable and really necessary. So thank you for that.
Ben. I appreciate it. One old head to the other.
There you go.
What a dude, Ben Lee. Thanks again. Also, we didn't get to this in the conversation. We did talk about how Ben and Ione have their own podcast, Weirder Together, but they also have their Weirder Together podcast network, which puts out podcasts by Jello Biafra, Lou Barlow, and Jay Mascis, 2/3 of Dinosaur Jr. And thanks again for listening to episode 93 of LSQ. I'm excited about some of the upcoming episodes this fall, with Molly Rankin from Always and Kazu Makino from Blonde Redhead. Jason Isbell is a guest in the near future. Oh, also next week, Andrew Wyatt of Mike Snow and Beyond. If you're not already subscribing, I hope you'll do that. You can find episodes at jennylsq.com, and on socials, I'm at jennylsq.